Well, this morning we are in week 2 of our sermon series on our Advent sermon series that we have simply called Make Room. And the title I told you last week, the title comes from that old Christmas carol, Joy to the World. And there's that phrase in Joy to the World that simply says, let every heart prepare him room. And that's what we're aiming for this Advent season. Listen, not just to survive December, right? But to intentionally make room for Jesus in our hearts and lives. I was thinking about that this week when I pulled into the Walmart parking lot on Hewitt Drive. I got out of my truck and there was a young couple that was there. And they had just bought a 65-inch Vizio TV. Like, it looked spectacular. The only problem was they were driving a little Toyota Corolla. I don't know if you know the size of a Corolla or not, but Corollas aren't that big. And I could tell by the body language of the wife or the girlfriend, the fiance, I don't know which one it was, but I could tell by her body language, this was not her idea, right? Because they were both, man, they were driving the Corolla, but they were on a struggle bus trying to fit the big old TV in that small little car. And I remember I saw them struggling. I went in. I just had a couple things to get in Walmart. So I went in. I got my couple of things. When I came out, they were still working on it. In fact, they had taken the TV out of the box, and they were trying their best to get that thing in there. And there was no Christmas joy to be found on those faces at all. But here's what hit me as I was watching all this go down, which, by the way, I don't know how it ended. Sorry. I wasn't going to be that guy in the truck just watching them the whole time. But here's what kind of ran through my head as I was watching it all go down. Listen, we make room for all kinds of things, don't we? Even things don't really fit. In this Advent season, my simple encouragement to us is this: let's be intentional about making room for Christ in our hearts and in our homes. And in this Advent season, if you didn't get it last week, this Advent season, we've got a variety of resources that we are providing for you to help you just kind of as you prepare your hearts for Advent. There should be some devotional books, some bags in the back. If you didn't get one of those and we're looking for one, there should be some in the back there. I know Michelle has some family guides as well that will help you as we kind of prepare our hearts for the season. Well, this morning, I want to invite you, as we come to this second week, I want to invite you to meet me in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 9 is where we're going to be this morning as we think about this second week of Advent. Last week, if you remember, we began this sermon series by looking at what I would simply say is probably the most overlooked and underappreciated passages in the story of the birth of Jesus. Last week, we looked at the genealogy of Jesus from Matthew chapter 1. And part of what we discovered last week is even in the midst of all of these names that you probably like me can't pronounce all that well, even in the midst of all of this, we saw last week the beautiful way that God sent his son through messy family trees and real life stories just like yours and mine. But this week, as we come to Isaiah chapter 9, I want us to look at what I would argue is probably one of the most familiar prophecies of the birth of Jesus in all of the Bible. The amazing thing about Isaiah chapter 9 is Isaiah chapter 9 was actually written 700 years before Jesus ever appeared on the scene. And Isaiah wrote this at a time that was in probably one of the most difficult seasons in the history of God's people. Because not only were the people of God rebelling against God, not only were the kings at this time rejecting the provisions of God, but it was during this time that a new superpower was beginning to emerge on the scene in the Middle East. And that superpower was known as the Assyrians. The mighty Assyrian army was making their way through this particular region. And they were coming from the north in two different waves. And because God's people had rejected the provisions of God, the Assyrians were making their way and would eventually, again, in two waves, completely conquer the land and haul off the people. Now, obviously, when you think about that background, obviously, this was a devastating scene. In fact, if you're in Isaiah chapter 9, if you look back at the very end of Isaiah chapter 8, you'll kind of get a feel for the weight of what was going on in the scene. So look back with me at Isaiah chapter 8, beginning in verse 22. Isaiah writes, "And they will look to the earth, but behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness." Now, I don't know about you, but Isaiah chapter 8, verse 22 is probably not a verse you're going to see on any Christmas cards this year, right? Like, this is at the end of Isaiah chapter 8, like things are really rough. And yet, this darkness, when we come to the end of Isaiah chapter 8, this darkness is not just random. Like, they are in this place. The people of God are in this darkness and distress because they had completely rebelled against the Lord. I know that Billy Joel says that we didn't start the fire, but in Isaiah chapter 8, I think that Isaiah would beg to differ, because the people of God did start the fire that led to this rebellion and ultimately led to some of the darkest days of their life. So now, this morning, when we come to Isaiah chapter 9, part of what we're going to see is God's gracious response to the brokenness and the weariness of the world, both at their times and I would suggest even in ours. And so even as we come to Isaiah chapter 9, can I just tell you, like, I have been praying for you and for me as we come to Isaiah chapter 9 this morning, because I truly believe that the prophecy that the prophet Isaiah spoke in Isaiah chapter 9 are words that you and I need to hear even today. And so I've been praying that God would just open our eyes in this moment as we come to Isaiah chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. So, having said all of that, having given kind of that context, let's look at how the story shifts beginning in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1. If you found that, would you just say amen today? This is the word of the Lord, Isaiah chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. "But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. You have multiplied the nations. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. But the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. All right, so as you look at Isaiah chapter 9, probably the most familiar verses are the hinge verses in verses 6 and 7. Would you agree with that? All right, so verses 6 and 7 give us the promise of a baby, of a son, of a king, a promised one who would come and who would establish his rule and his reign in a way that would forever change the history of the world. And so this morning, as we make our way through this prophecy, here's what I want us to do. I want us to see in the text, I want us to see 3 life-transforming realities about this promised one. All right, so if you're taking notes, 3 life-transforming realities about the promised one. So friends, listen, if you are here today and you are wondering, like, what difference does Jesus' life make in my own? Like, why should we make room for Jesus this season? Well, here are 3 life-transforming realities. The first one is this. Number 1, Jesus, hear me this morning, Jesus is our glorious hope in the darkness. Amen? Like, Jesus is our glorious hope in the darkness. Isaiah chapter 9 begins with a spectacular ray of hope. In comparison to the way Isaiah chapter 8 ended, Isaiah chapter 9 begins with this burst of great hope. Isaiah says in verse 1, "But there will be no more gloom for her who is anguished. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and Naphtali. But in the latter time he made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations." And I want you to notice, right from the very first verse, that there is a contrast in verse 1. There's a contrast between the former time and the latter time. Did you see that? In the former time, the land of Zebulun and Naphtali were not held in honor. The land of Zebulun and Naphtali was borderland. This was land that foreigners would come and go, and it was viewed as a spiritually compromised land. And part of the reason why we say that is because if you take a look at the map, I think we can show you a quick map on the screen. If you look at the map, part of what you'll see, hopefully, I don't know, that may be really small, but the part that's circled on the very top, that is the land of Naphtali and Zebulun. And Naphtali and Zebulun were obviously two tribes of Israel, and they were apportioned, the 2 lands at the very northmost part of the land of Israel. This was the fringes of Jewish life. This was the first place that would come under attack during wars, because most of Israel's enemies would approach from Mesopotamia, just like the Assyrians had done. This is how they had invaded. And so because of that, the land of Zebulun and Naphtali was a region of Galilee that many considered to be cursed or broken. It was a dark place, spiritually considered impure, compromised by the Gentile nations that would come in, maybe not for battle, but maybe just for trade. So this was, again, considered a spiritually compromised area. Which means if you stop and think about this, like really think about this for a moment. Like if this is true of this part of the world, if this is part of the way that people were thinking, the last place in the world that you would think hope would arise would be this part, right? Like if you were going to pick a place where the future Messiah would emerge, you would probably pick somewhere like Jerusalem, and certainly not somewhere like Galilee. And yet, that's exactly what the Lord says. He says, in this place of deepest darkness, in the midst of people who have been walking through the darkest nights and the loneliness of days, in this place and among the people who were forgotten and overlooked, listen, it is here, Isaiah says, that God will cause the greatest light to shine. You see, my friend, hear me. The hope that comes flooding from this text this morning, the goodness of God that comes oozing from the pages of this prophecy is, listen, there is no darkness that the Lord cannot overcome. There is no past that the Lord cannot redeem. There is no darkness so deep, no circumstance so far gone that the light of Christ cannot reach. In fact, this is exactly what Matthew says of Jesus in Matthew chapter 4. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 13, Matthew tells us that Jesus, hear this, he left Jerusalem and he went and he lived in Capernaum by the sea. Hear this. In the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. In other words, church, listen, when the people of Jesus' day heard that Jesus had come from Nazareth in Galilee, they often wondered, can anything good come from Nazareth? But 700 years before Jesus was ever born, the Lord had already determined that this is where the greatest light of the world would come from. The least likely of places, if for no other reason, to declare there is no darkness so deep that the Lord cannot overcome. Friends, hear me today. There is nothing that you or your story that has happened that the Lord cannot redeem, because he is the true light of the world. I don't know if you saw this or not, but a couple of weeks ago on the news, there was a story about this town in the northernmost part of Alaska. And part of the reason it made the news was because on November the 18th was the last time that the sun was going to rise on this part of Alaska for 64 days. Anybody see this? It is a time of the year that is known as polar night. And for the next 2 months, the sun will not get above the horizon. In fact, the next time that the sun will rise in this part of the world is January the 26th, 2026 at 1:23 p.m. Like, that's crazy to me. But what's interesting is that during polar night, it's dark for 19 hours of the day. But then there are 5 hours of the day that is called civil twilight. And during civil twilight, the sun sits just below the horizon, which means it's not daylight, but it's not fully dark as well. Instead, there's this pale blue glow that just kind of emerges in the sky. You can tell that by the picture in back of me. And you stop and think about this image of it not being completely light, that there's this blue haze that is hinting at the sun coming up, like you're expecting the sun to rise at any moment, which physiologically, as you begin to see light, like your body and your brain begins to say, hey, get ready, the light's coming, it's coming, get ready, here it comes. But then listen, in polar night, the light never really dawns. It teases a light. There's a signal that the light is there. There's a hope that maybe it is coming, but during polar night, darkness never goes away. And you know, as I thought about that, I think that is such a powerful picture of the spiritual condition of so many around us. Right? Like, obviously, we live in a world that is broken. Like, we don't have to look far in the world around us to see the darkness. The truth of the matter is, we often sense the darkness even within us. And so we look for all kinds of things in the midst of this darkness. We look for all kinds of things that's going to provide light for our lives. In fact, part of the reason I think we love Christmas so much is because this is the one time of the year where culturally we are collectively looking for something to fill the darkness in all of us. And we look for it in presents and bows and relationships and things. We try to buy the light somehow for 3 easy payments of $19.99. Right? But what do we discover? We discover that none of these things give us the light of life